Hej och välkomna hit allihopa. Jag heter Rebecka Jonsson och pluggar här på universitetet på Policies kandidatprogram. Jag är också aktiv i en kristen studentförening som heter Agape som är med och anordnar den här kvällen. Vi är jättetacksamma att Dr. Ravi Zacharias och hans team har kommit hit idag. Och vi är även jättetacksamma för alla er som har kommit hit idag. Vi har folk från olika delar av världen här idag. Vi har folk från Italien, Tyskland, Holland, Finland och även från många delar av Sverige. Så därför så kommer vi att ta resten av kvällen på engelska.
Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Barrett Harkins. I am full-time staff with the student organization that she mentioned, Agape Sverige. My wife and I are the national campus directors for that. And about 2.5 years ago, we sent an email to RZIM Ministries and asked them to come and join us for this evening, and they said 2.5 years. And so that was the longest I had ever looked into my calendar to think about putting anything in other than maybe, well, not even my wedding. And we waited with much anticipation, and I hope that you have looked forward to this evening as well. For a lot of you, you've come from pretty far places. We're very excited to have you, very excited to have Dr. Zacharias as well. I'd like to mention that tonight is being live streamed all over the world, that when a live stream event happens with RZI Ministry, an email goes out to over 50,000 people. So our crowd tonight is possibly much larger than this room. I would also like to mention that as a student organization, we've been working together with another student organization who's been very important in pulling this evening off, called Credo. Credo and Agape both believe that life has questions. Many of those questions are difficult. But as Christian organizations, we believe that those questions are best answered in the person of Jesus Christ. And by and large, that is why we have invited Dr. Zacharias to here tonight. So no matter where you're at in your life, no matter what you're thinking about and questions, we believe that there are answers to those questions, and we hope that tonight provides a little bit of insight into finding perhaps some of those other questions that you may be struggling with. I'd like to mention tonight also that there will be a question and answer period following Dr. Zacharias' talk. You are most welcome to go ahead and SMS questions to a phone. If you have a pen and paper ready, go ahead and write this number down. The number is, if you're dealing with an out-of-country phone, +46 is the country code, 0738966752. 0738966752. You're most welcome at any point to SMS a question that you might have, and we'll probably start off the question and answer period with a question from those SMSs. During the question and answer period, there are 2 microphones that are set up directly right here in front or in the middle section. Please go to queue up behind those microphones. You're welcome to ask one question, but please keep it brief so that we can have as many questions as possible. Dr. Zacharias will be joined by 2 members of his speaking team, Michael Ramsden and Dr. Nabil Qureshi. Nabil Qureshi tomorrow will actually have it speaking as well on his life and his book that he has written called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, and his journey to faith in Jesus Christ. That is tomorrow at 4 o'clock in this same room. We invite you to come and join us for that. As well as tomorrow, Dr. Zacharias and his team will be speaking again, starting off. Michael Ramsden will start us off in the evening, and then Dr. Zacharias will finish us off in the evening with Why I Am a Christian. So tonight and tomorrow really work together. Tonight, Dr. Zacharias will be talking about secularization, its control and power, and tomorrow will be Why I Am a Christian. Dr. Zacharias is an incredible person. I could list off his very long accolades, foremost of which for us here in Sweden, the UN. He has spoken at twice in their annual prayer breakfast, which starts off the UN annual meetings. And there are many other things that we could mention about him, but what I love most about Dr. Zacharias, and I think this comes all off in his speaking, but as I have gotten to know him over the past 24 hours just a little bit, what I appreciate most about him is that whether he's speaking to the UN or billionaires or world leaders around the world, or whether he's speaking to me, I feel valued. And I think that comes across. And the truth that he speaks and the things he thinks about and talks about, I think are worth taking our time Because as I used to tell some of my friends when I lived in different parts of the world, when we would discuss different parts of religion or thought, and we would get frustrated perhaps and not be able to find agreement. At the end of it, I would say, but let's talk about this again tomorrow, because if anything in life is worth thinking about, these are the things. And those things that are deep and most meaningful, when someone is as humble as Dr. Zacharias, it brings me to thinking even more deeply. And so I hope tonight that you are able to do that as well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ravi Zacharias.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Barrett's comment reminded me of when I was living in Canada, and somewhere in the early part of 1972, I got a telephone call. I was in my undergraduate studies, about ready to graduate, and somebody had given me a call and wanted to know if I could speak on May the 6th, coming up in a few months. I said, well, let me check my diary. For some reason, that date rings a bell. And I looked at my diary, and it was to be my wedding day. So it is good to enter your wedding day in the diary as well. My wife has never forgiven me for it, but 42 years later, the wound is slowly closing, that I almost took a speaking engagement. And the irony is our honeymoon was in Niagara Falls, and the speaking engagement was in Niagara Falls too. So she looked at me and said, don't you dare even think of, for all I know, she's watching right now. Well, I'll be joined after I finish speaking by two of my good-looking colleagues, Michael Ramsden from Oxford and Nabil Qureshi. So when I finish speaking, if you have any questions, Michael's doctoral work is in international monetary law, and he's also lectured in philosophy and ethics. Nabil Qureshi is a medical doctor by training and picked up a couple of other postgraduate degrees in theology and biblical studies, heading off to Oxford this fall to do his PhD. So if you have any questions on philosophy or ethics afterwards, Michael will be able to answer them. Any on science and world religions, Nabil will be able to answer them. If you have any questions on Indian cuisine and recipes, on where you get the best tandoori chicken or whatever, I'll be delighted to field those questions. But with two such illustrious people, I'm reminded of this occasion where it was an English setting, and the Englishmen were huddling around a table, and a Japanese gentleman walked in and sat down at one of these tables. So the Englishman thought he would help him and looked over to him and picked up a knife and said, this be knifey. Then he picked up a fork and said, and this be forky. And the spoon, and this be spoony. And to their utter surprise, the Japanese gentleman was the main speaker for the evening. And he went up to the front and delivered his talk in flawless English, came back and sat down and looked at his friends and the gentleman there and said, did you like his speechy? So I feel a little bit like the likey speechy one here with two of these boys about to come on later on. You'll enjoy them. I want to give you a bit of a lighthearted story here. Unfortunately, it's a sad event that is as a backdrop, but I hope that does not offend anybody here. The point that is being made is something very different, and that's why I am actually quoting this. I was writing a book, one of my books in Thailand, when I got this from a friend of mine in India. And it says, what is globalization? An illustration in Princess Diana's death. An English princess with an Egyptian boyfriend in a German car driven by a Dutch driver crashes in a French tunnel while being chased by Italian paparazzi on Japanese bikes, treated by a Portuguese doctor with Brazilian medicine. This mail was written by a South Indian living in North India, writing to a westernized Indian from Atlanta, but writing in Thailand, and is sent from the clouds on a Chinese laptop smuggled by a Pakistani via Nepal and Myanmar, probably through the black market in Malaysia, and then smuggled into India, and then sold to this owner. Amazing. All of that is actually possible. A lot of it happened. We think of globalization today as something that's a given. A day ago, I was in Atlanta, Georgia. Then you take a plane, fly in through Amsterdam, and you're here. From here, I'm heading on to parts of Asia and doing some speaking out there. You walk into any shopping centers and the shops begin to look the same. The brand names are the same. The market prices are just as elevated because of the familiarity of the name. And we talk about the globalized perspective with which we live. And yet, even though our communication has grown exponentially with our capacities to communicate, be it visual, or be it by way of hearing, or be it through prestigious universities such as the one in which I'm now present and given the privilege to speak, the fact of the matter is that our worldviews, even in this auditorium, may be dramatically different. We may be globalized in terms of capacities, but there is an internalization of our worldviews which may be poles apart from the person sitting next to you. Ted Turner, who was the mogul behind CNN and many other television networks, talking in the 1970s, said television was going to solve all of our communication barriers. We were going to eliminate all of these walls, and we would be able to speak eyeball to issues on matters of great significance. The first time I spoke at the United Nations many years ago, I was living in New York at that time, and I was sitting at a table with a gentleman from one country and a few others, and just to make conversation, nervous about where to begin, I looked at the ambassador next to me and I said to him, "What is the greatest strength of the UN?" And he said to me that we are talking to each other rather than not talking to each other. I thought, wow, this is really very encouraging right now. So then I looked at him and said, "What is the greatest weakness of the UN?" He said that we don't talk the same language. I said, "Don't you have interpreters?" He said, yeah, but that's not what I mean. He says, "You see that man?" And he pointed to another ambassador at another table. He says, "When we talk peace, for him peace means when we've settled the issue with his guns pointing in my direction. When I talk peace, I want to eliminate guns completely." Now, in the UN, if the ideas behind their words provide such adversarial meanings and equivocation constantly, can you imagine how difficult it has become in a world of trying to find answers to the question of truth? You know, the motto here, the words, it is more important to think freely than, more important to think that which is right than rather just to think freely. And many students disagreed with that. They said the freedom of thought is more important than the correction of thought. Now, I somehow assumed that behind that comment, two things lay. Number one, that the people who disagreed with that thought their conclusion was right. That they assumed it was a right kind of thinking to think about this dissonance. But the second thing I assume what really lurks behind it is the critique. Who is going to determine what is right? That's what really, I think, lies behind the critique. And now as we interact with cultures and so on, and I talk about secularization, its control and power, I want to talk about what it is that cultures really are wrestling with today, and how do we find answers with all of our systemic differences and our contradictions of values. In the 1980s, Daniel Yankelovich, a sociologist, wrote an article on the search for meaning in America and the shifting values in American life. So that was over 30 years ago that he wrote it. And he quoted another famous sociologist in the beginning of his article. And he said this, Culture is an effort to provide a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all human beings in the passage of their lives. Simple definition. It's an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passage of their lives. Now, the fascinating thing about that statement is, I'm not even sure everybody in every culture will accept that definition. I remember at the University of Iowa, when I quoted this in a talk, a student went up to the microphone and said to me, "Who told you life needed to be coherent?" Where did you get this idea from, that life needed to be coherent? Is this another Western idea we are foisting upon the rest of the world? And I have learned long enough, you allow anybody to talk long enough, they will trip themselves up, which is the danger we have. So I looked at her and I said, "Ma'am, I will be happy to answer your question if you will first answer mine. Do you want my answer to be coherent, or may my answer be incoherent?" And everybody in the hall, about 1,500 of them packed out there, started laughing. I said, no, I don't want you to laugh at her. Please don't. I want to hear from you. Do you want my answer to be coherent, or is it okay for my answer to be incoherent? You see, the games we play sometimes, we demand of a counter-perspective coherence while we may live systemically contradictory in our own worldviews. That's the danger with which we now live, especially in a totally secularized consciousness. Now, before I go any further, let me say this to you. Ought our world governments, should they be secular? Yes. In fact, every worldview that I give to you, every sociological idea that I give to you, in principle, is a good way to be. But if they are taken to an extreme distortion, that's when the danger points really come in. Let me explain what I mean. You see, because religion itself has not got a good history in how religious authorities have dealt with cultures, in how they've dominated and imposed their worldview, where the person ought to have had the freedom to believe or to disbelieve. So just to say, instead of a secular leadership, we need to have a religious leadership, history is replete with examples of the abuse both have made. But the problem with secularism and secularization is actually very intrinsic. In religious worldviews, often it's a perversion of the terms and the application of it. Let me explain myself. What do I mean by secularization? Secularization is defined in these words. It's the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. It is a process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. For example, if you were watching a television program, say in the United States or in parts of Europe and so on, maybe even here, and the issue of a great social controversy is raised, whatever it may be, sacredness of life, sacredness of sexuality, whatever it is, if that subject is being discussed and there's a platform full of authorities and you take a professor, a philosopher, a lawyer, a judge, a psychologist, a medical practitioner, a social theorist, and in the middle of it put a clergyman on that platform in that panel. Who do you think the audience will assume to be the most prejudiced in his or her view on that panel? they will immediately assume the clergyman is the most prejudiced because he has a transcendent worldview. Therefore, he's ideologically prejudiced. The rest of them live with a completely objective worldview, be it in psychology or philosophy or law or whatever it is. That's the way we have seen religious ideas. And so when we talk about secularization, the process by which religious ideas, institutions, and interpretations have lost their social significance. Now, when we move into this theoretically to its practical outworkings, where do we end up? How do we really live in society with a total secularized consciousness? The English journalist Steve Turner describes culture secularized in these words. Here's what he says. Who are we? What is our creed? Then he answers with tongue-in-cheek, a fair bit of humor. We believe in Marx, Freud, and Darwin. We believe everything is okay, as long as you don't hurt anyone to the best of your definition of hurt and to the best of your definition of knowledge. We believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that taboos are the only thing that are taboo. We believe that everything is getting better despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think some of his morals were actually bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same, at least the ones that we read were. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end, and if the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average. What's average is normal. What's normal is good. We believe in total disarmament. We believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors, and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that lets him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him, and reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust, and history will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, accepting the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. And then he puts this postscript. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blasts school, it is but the sound of man worshiping his maker. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is his rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, youths go looting, bomb blast school, it is but the sound of man worshiping his maker. Just 2 weeks ago, my colleagues and I were in the little place of Newtown in Connecticut, where a little over 14 months ago, this 20-year-old marches in with his firepower and mows down 26 people. 20 of them plus were first graders. And it is extremely difficult to speak in an audience that has lived with a wound as painful and as fresh as that. But you see, Nietzsche himself, when he coined the phrase God is dead, said, because of what we have accomplished in doing, the 20th century might well become the bloodiest century in history. And universal madness will break out. Might well become the bloodiest century in history. And he was right. as in the 20th century we ended up killing more in warfare than the previous 19 centuries put together. Here's the problem. What is the problem with a totally secularized consciousness? The problem is one of definitions. Let me ask you, for example, give you this illustration. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've lived there now since nearly 30 years. But in the 1980s, in Atlanta, there was a very historic trial taking place of a man who was a kingpin in the pornographic industry. So vile was his pornography that they said his pornography and his presentations made the Playboy magazine look like kids' stuff. The man was called Larry Flynt and taken to trial. The irony of it is that in the process of selecting the jury, the man defending Larry Flynt was questioning the potential jurors, and this was one of his questions to them. Do you belong to a church? Do you go to church? And the reason he wanted the answer to the question is because he believed anybody who went to church would not be a good jurist for his client and would have prejudiced opinions about pornography. So he was looking for zombies, people who had no view on matters like this. Finally, after 5 days, they found some people who did not belong to a church. In the south of the United States, so it was very difficult to find. So they found somebody. Now, the man questioning the witnesses had a brilliant ploy. Witnesses who were testifying against his client, he would go at it this way. Have you ever walked into an art gallery? Yes. Have you ever paid to go into an art gallery? Yes. Have you ever paid to go into an art gallery where there are painting by the grandmasters of art of unclothed people? Yes. Of people nude in their paintings? Yes, you've done that. You've gone into an art gallery, you've paid to go in, and that's the kind of paintings in that gallery as well. Yes. Would you please tell this jury why you call that art and you call my client's stuff pornography? Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now, you're not going to sit on there and say, may I first give to you my philosophical definition of art? You can't do that as a witness. But suppose this man were sitting opposite me in a coffee shop and said, Ravi, what's the difference? You tell me. You know, I think there are two illustrations I would like to give to him. When Michelangelo first started doing his great work, at him and wanted him to understand what he was doing. He said, do you know what you're doing? He said, yeah. He said, why do you want to do this? He said, because I want to see man as God sees man. And the teacher said, that's excellent. Just remember, you are not God. Just remember, you are not God. C.S. Lewis, in his book, A Pilgrim's Regress, has a brilliant analogy that I think is a great response. It is this. It's an allegorical journey of Lewis, the great Oxonian, the great Cambridge scholar, and who was himself in a search for his spiritual in his spiritual journey. He flirted with atheism, flirted with pantheism, and ultimately, as he made his commitment to Jesus Christ in his book, Surprised by Joy. In his book, A Pilgrim's Regress, he allegorically traces his journey. He refers to himself as a person called John. Now, I want you to listen to this very carefully, because it's brilliantly done. So John is on this journey, and he calls it A Pilgrim's Regress for a reason, the book. It's because he said, as I was making my search and pursuing answers, I turned away from many options. I didn't quite know why. But after I found my commitment to Jesus Christ, I took a regressive journey because I did have the explanation and the answers. That's why he calls it A Pilgrim's Regress. But now as he's moving along, he describes himself as John, trapped in a mountain that he calls the spirit of the age, living by all the pleasures of the spirit of the age. But ironically, he describes himself as a man handcuffed and in chains. In the spirit of the age, allegorically, he actually sees himself trapped. And while he's in those handcuffs, he's pondering all the major issues. And then the waiter representing the spirit of the age brings him his breakfast, unbinds him, and he's going to enjoy the food. And he said, I made the mistake of commenting on the deliciousness of the milk. And the waiter said, you only call it milk? What is milk? It's the secretion of a cow, isn't it? It secretes urine. It secretes milk. You call one thing milk, you call the other thing that. What's the difference? He says, I don't know what to say. Then he said, I made a bigger mistake commenting on the tastiness of the eggs. And the waiter drew a crass analogy of what eggs were. Lewis says, in the person of John, I was silent. I didn't know what to say. He said, but a few moments went by, and reason came riding on a horse and rescued me. And as reason rescued me, I looked back at the mountain with his Neronian stare of the spirit of the age, and I said to him, sir, you lie. You lie because you don't know the difference between what nature has meant for nourishment and what nature has meant for garbage. You lie. You don't know the difference between what nature has meant for nourishment and what nature has meant for garbage. And I want to tell you something, in the academic world, we are redefining things, and we think by changing names, we reconstitute its essence. In 1981, was it? No, 1983, September 1, 1983. Korean Airlines 007 started off from New York on its journey to Seoul. And after making its stop, was on its final leg coming into Seoul and strayed off course. And two Russian fighter planes came in side by side and shot that plane down. And all 200 Korean Airlines passengers were sent into midair, blown to smithereens. And an investigation began. And a Western journalist by the name of William Safire was talking to the Russian prestigious journalist by the name of Vladimir Posner. And I watched the exchange. And Safire said to him, how could you justify this? And Posner said, you understand that there were no lights on in that Korean airliner. And Safire said, that is not true. The lights were on. He said, no, Mr. Safire, they were not on. I said, but the recording of the conversation says that the lights were on. He said, you got it wrong. What it meant was these two Russian pilots talking to each other said their lights were on. Safire said, Mr. Posner, let me read for you the exact transcript from the exchange. One Russian pilot said to the other Russian pilot, target's lights are on. Was one of you referring to your comrade as a target? You know what? When 200 bodies can be sent floating from the air to an early death, and somebody can start playing word games with you, it's pretty tragic in life when people are sacrificed at the altar of deceit and language. It is incredibly important that you and I find our definitions and find that coherence and that cogency and a legitimate representation of what is essentially true. That is why two great philosophers from two completely different perspectives, Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, and Anthony Flew, the sophisticated philosopher in the 90s, both of them in the latter years of their life said they were making their change in their own philosophy. Sartre, actually, I've documented it in one of my books, said his existential atheism was ultimately unlivable. Because when he saw what was happening in Vietnam and saw all that was going on, he could not avoid judging morally what he thought ought not to be done. And he found his own philosophy, he said, unlivable. And Anthony Flew, struggling with his own struggle in moral thinking in his latter years before he passed away. I am a firm believer of the fact that poets and artists sometimes face reality with a greater degree of truthfulness than abstract answers can, or philosophers can. And here's what one rock group said: cat's foot, iron claw, neurosurgeons scream for more, from paranoia's poison door, 21st century schizoid man. Blood rack, barbed wire, politicians, funeral pyre, innocents raped with napalm fire, 21st century schizoid man. Death seed, blind man's greed, poets starving, children bleed, nothing he's got he really needs, 21st century schizoid man. Now here's the point. The walls on which the prophets wrote is cracking at the seams. Upon the instruments of death, the sunlight brightly gleams. Will no one lay the laurel wreath as silence drowns the screams? Between the iron gates of fate, the seeds of time are sown and watered by the deeds of those who know and who are known. Knowledge is a deadly friend when no one sets the rules. The fate of all mankind, I see, is in the hands of fools. Confusion will be my epitaph as I crawl a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh, but I'm afraid tomorrow I'll be crying. You see, when a woman or a man sits in front of the lens of a camera, disrobed, in order to titillate just the baser bent in a human being's mind, purely for erotic persuasion, nothing more than that, something within her ought to stop and say, no, I must have a sense of shame that guides me. I won't do this. But you see, when secularization has had its complete sway, what it will do is destroy a person's sense of shame. That's what happens. And if shame is gone, you actually are in the process of making a monster on a journey. I think the definitions are so critical and so important. I don't know anybody whom I have met whose marriage broke up because he went to see museums and art galleries quite often. But I do know a lot of people whose marriages have collapsed because of the erotic escapes into a mindset that no one human being can ultimately satisfy. My youngest daughter works in the rescue of women from the sex trafficking industry and children with AIDS. She's yay-high. And I don't know how many times she said to me, Dad, would you please write a book on pornography with me? Because every one of these people that have exploited the women that I have seen and gone that route, a vast majority of them had their beginnings in pornography. Marriages have been shattered, and humanity has become debased to a point where no one human being can satisfy the imagination. And I've told her, I said, honey, I just don't want to even dabble in that stuff, to write on it. She says, no, you write on what it is meant to be. I'll write on what it is because I've seen it eyeball to eyeball. What happens? So when we make a crass statement in a courtroom that there is really no difference, you can only say that if all definitions have been destroyed of human essence, purpose, meaning, and essential worth. Secularization, no shame. End result, we go to pluralization. It's a legitimate expression, pluralization, again in society. But what happens when pluralization has its sway? Pluralization is where there's a competing number of worldviews available to its members and no one worldview is dominant. where there is a competing number of worldviews available to its members and no one worldview is dominant. In California, you can go in Los Angeles and see a guy pushing his wagon. He's a Korean selling kosher tacos. That's pluralization of food. Wonderful. When I moved to Canada, I was 20 years old. There was only one Indian restaurant, and it was horrible. I was not married at that time, and I was to sit there and say, why on earth am I coming here? It doesn't have a semblance of Indian food, but nobody knew any better. Today you go to Toronto, which is the most volitionally pluralistic society in the world, intentionally cross-cultural. You get the best Indian cuisine you'd ever want to see. London possibly accepted, and maybe India has a handful of them better, I don't know. But I just want you to know, pluralization has wonderful ideas. Our team, headquartered in Atlanta and gathered around the world, when we stand up and talk and listen to each other, it's wonderful to hear the different accents. It somehow doesn't sound the same. When I hear it in America, Michael Ramsden can read the grocery list and it sounds sophisticated, you know. Accents are great things. Food is a great thing. Values, sometimes you see these things, how they're expressed. I love the way they greet you in India and Thailand, like this, you know. And then you go to some parts of the world and they slap you on the back, you know, say, how you doing, bud? When I was at Texas A&M 10 days ago, you stand up and say, howdy. That's the way you greet them. You know, you feel like putting on a hat and boots, and you feel you belong. Pluralization is a great thing. But if pluralization and pluralism is taken to absolutize relativism, then you've got a problem. What do I mean by that? You see, relativism simply can't be true. Now, I know I'm talking to most of you who are probably relativists. It simply can't be true. You'll have your chance in the Q&A time. Why not? If a person says all truth is relative, that either includes itself or excludes itself. If it includes itself, that means that statement is not also always true. That absolutes actually exist. Or one way or the other, the sword works. It either includes itself, which means it's not always true, or it excludes itself, which means it's giving you an absoluteness of testing while telling you there are no such things as absolutes. Let me illustrate this for you. Now, it's going to be a bit tough, but let me do this. If you've read my writings or heard this, I try to do this because I think this is very important you follow this. You see, there are basically three laws of logic, and there are many that stand on them. One of the laws of logic is the law of non-contradiction. That a statement that is contradictory at the core, making two opposite claims, could not be true without qualifying one of the assertions in some way. We do that in a court of law. So I remember years ago in California, I was speaking on a series of talks, and a professor, an American professor, came up to the front and he said to me, I don't like the things you say. He said, I dare you to speak on the subject, why I am not a Hindu, and I will bring my entire class in philosophy and they will tear you to shreds. I said, that's supposed to be a very exciting prospect for me, that I select your subject and your students are going to tear me to shreds. I said, why do you say that? This is an American gentleman, you know. And he said to me, well, I have become one. I have become a Hindu. And he said, and when I listen to you talk about the Christian faith and so on, I just think you ought to talk on why you are not in the religion of your land of your birth and so on. He didn't worry about the religion of the land of his birth, but he was worrying about the religion of the land of my birth. And he said to me, you talk about that and we will take care of you. I said, no, sir, I won't do that. I tried to humor him. I said, I've heard when you take mud and throw it at others, not only do you get your hands dirty, you also lose a lot of ground. He didn't think that was very funny. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I will speak to you on why I am a Christian and let your class come and tear me to shreds. I'll be ready for that. So the next day he came there. You should have seen them coming in, my goodness. The only thing they looked like, they weren't carrying any weapons, but the stairs were enough in that one corner to make me just terrified. So I just looked on the other side and spoke the whole evening. At the end of it, he came forward with this whole entourage and he looked at me and he said, you know what? You may have spoken on why you are a Christian, but you gave some logical reasoning and so on. I can see now why you are not you don't belong to Hinduism, you're not a Hindu, because you obviously don't understand Eastern logic. I said, all right, sir, let me tell you something. You've got a whole entourage behind you, and you're trying to impress them, and I'm going to try and impress them. I don't want this game. Let's go out and have a meal. You pay, I'll pray, and we'll talk. So he agreed, and he said, can I bring the professor of psychology with me? I don't know why, whether he was bringing somebody to study both of us. I said, yes, let's go. So we arrive in this Los Angeles restaurant, and he takes my placemat, the other professor's placemat, the third placemat, and his placemat paper, and he stacks it up because he's going to draw out his argument for me. He started off with this statement. He said, Mr. Zacharias, there are two kinds of logic. Actually, I should tell you, that's wrong. But you don't stop anybody that soon. So you allowed him to keep going. He said there is a Eastern logic and a Western logic. He said in the West, we think either this or that. It was the same idea of coherence. You see, we don't want to be, you think either this is right or that is right. And so we have this either-or mentality in the West. And so we dismiss anything that doesn't agree with us. And he said, that is a Western way of thinking. I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, it is. I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, it is. Finally, he said to me, who are you to tell me it is not? I said, all right, keep going. And then he talks to me about the both and logic. It is not either this or that. It is both this and that, a la Hegel. You know, first you take the thesis, which spawns its antithesis, you put it together and it forms a synthesis. That in turn becomes a thesis, spawns an antithesis, and you get a synthesis, and you keep going in this dialectical way. He said, like Marxism. I said, yeah, the classless society. Nobody ever shows you one. But here it is, both this and that. He said that's an Eastern way of thinking. They don't think non-contradictorily. They think dialectically, both this and that. And he said, Ravi, your mistake was this. When you were studying that Eastern worldview, you studied it as a Westerner thinking either or. You should have studied it as an Easterner thinking both and you would have had no problem looking at all the contradictions in the Eastern worldview. They live with contradictions, not a problem, and so on. So he's waxing eloquent, you know, on all of this. Finally, I took one of his placemats on which he'd scribbled. I said, I have just one question for you. When I am studying the Eastern worldview, you are telling me that I either use the both-hand system or nothing else. Is that right? That I either use the dialectical system or nothing else. Is that right? He didn't even eat his lunch. The psychologist and I had finished ours. He put his knife and fork down, which he had just picked up. And I quote, here's exactly what he says to me. He says, the either or does seem to emerge, doesn't it? I said, yes, sir. Even in India, we look both ways before we cross the street. It is either the bus or me, not both of us. And I said, and you know what you've got wrong, sir? I hate to correct you. Do you know what you've got wrong? You've got it dead wrong. Gautama Buddha use the law of non-contradiction. That's why he rejected Hinduism and his way of thinking. Shankara rejected personal deities because he rejected with the law of non-contradiction to his way of thinking. Anybody who tells you that Eastern philosophers live with the dialectical method have a half-truth. Existentially we do, but theoretically that is not true. Shankara believed rigorously in the law of non-contradiction. His way of dealing was with debates. He debated the opposition. I said, so sir, it's got nothing to do with East or West. It's got everything to do with what is true and rationally tenable. That's the way we look at it. When I was telling one of my former Hindu friends that, he started laughing. He said, that's why you're an apologist and I'm just an ordinary pastor. He said, even though he was a nuclear physicist by training. He said, Ravi, if he'd said that to me, I would have simply said to him, if both and is all you crack it out to be, why can't I use both the and, both this and that? Why do I have to use just one of them? He said, you just came for it with the jugular, either this or that. The attack point would have been the same. You live a life of contradiction, it'll break down. It'll break down. You can't have your own law of gravity and say, I'm going to jump, but I'm not going to fall. You can't have your own moral theory and say, I can do whatever I want, and there's no payday someday. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, there are absolutes by which we must govern our lives. Let me read this for you. This comes from a skeptic. It is an absolutely amazing article. This professor, a man by the name of Loyal Rue, writes an article and says, philosopher says, the world desperately needs a noble lie. Religious philosopher Loyal Rue says modern culture urgently needs a noble lie. Such a myth that links the moral teachings of religion with the scientific facts of life. He said science has eroded the plausibility of Judeo-Christian myths. They are gone. It has got into our heads and consciousness in such a way that the traditional myths can no longer be swallowed. These myths, he said, include archaic views of the universe, a presumption that humans are at the center of existence, and the stories of Jesus' resurrection and Moses bringing the Ten Commandments down. Dispel these myths of religion, he said, and all that is now left for us is actually nihilism, which considers life and the universe meaningless. The myths serve as a framework for religious teachings that brought about man's betterment, Rue says. Without their integration of cosmology and morality, of cosmic facts with idealism, people will ultimately deny fixed standards and do whatever they choose, splintering our society. Or they might embrace the totalitarian option, which relies on government to force human beings to behave, he said. Professor Rue, 46 years old, a professor of religion and philosophy in Iowa, presented this thesis at a recent symposium of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington. A church-going but skeptical man, Rue suggests that we start all over and we need to create a new myth, a noble lie that squares with what is known scientifically, something that is convincing even if it is not factual. What would that lie be? He doesn't specify. It remains for the artists, the poets, the novelists, and the musicians, the filmmakers, the tricksters and masters of illusion to winch us towards our salvation by seducing us into embracing a noble lie, he told this scientific meeting. Perhaps, he said in an interview, it is possible to rework plausible again. In any case, the illusion must be so imaginative, so compelling that it cannot be resisted, so beautiful and satisfying at the same time that all would feel they have to accept it. And he told the meeting, what I mean by the noble lie is one that deceives us, tricks us, compels us beyond all self-interest, beyond ego, beyond family, nation, and race, that will deceive us into the view that our moral discourse must serve the interests not only of ourselves and each other, but of the earth as well. Amazing. Come up with a noble lie that will deceive us. You know what he's saying? We're not going to make it. We're not going to make it with relativism. We have to have some absolutes. Secularization carried to its logical outworking, no shame. Pluralization ultimately kills reason. And finally, it comes to privatization. Privatization where we are forced to keep our values and our spiritual beliefs in private and not bring it into the public square. The amputation of your greatest value from public proclamation. You know, I grew up in India, lived in Delhi till I was 20. India is my homeland. There's a beautiful Indian song. If any Indian is here, they'll know it. It goes like this. Mera juta hai Japani, patloon Englishstani, sar par lal topi Rusi, phir bhi dil hai Hindustani. My shoes may be Japanese, my trouser English, my hat may be Russian, but my heart is still Indian. It's in the blood. It's in your DNA. 80% Hindu, 10% Muslim, Sikhs, Zoroastrians, Christians, the rest, the Christian population growing quite significantly. I never, ever remember, even once, looking at my Hindu friends who had just come from the temple with the marks on their forehead or whatever, and denying them that right. Never even felt it. All of my schooling, I had numerous Hindu philosophers and Muslim philosophers coming and lecture. Never had a Christian philosopher. I wasn't one myself. Did I sit there and resent the right of that man to tell me what he believed and why he believed it? No. It is part of academic growth to be able to listen to perspectives and counter-perspectives, even if you don't agree with it, and let the mind then come upon that which is true. Now you go to some American universities, as I went to one recently, for the first time in all of the years in one of the Ivy League schools, placards were being held up to stop you from speaking on the subject of tolerance. Quite amazing, quite amazing. Did I say, why? The motto at Oxford University is, "The Lord is my light," and Richard Dawkins is his own light. And it's okay, but he wants to block the light out for everybody else if they want to listen, discuss, and dialogue. That's not academic learning. That is demagogic imposition by castigating a worldview after making a caricature of it. Privatization. You see, what I believe about God has everything to do with what I believe about everything else. Something to the effect said by Chesterton, people debating whether he worded it in these ways or not, but the idea was this: God is like the sun. You cannot look at it. Without it, you can't look at anything else. In other words, your belief in God dictates everything you believe about all your other values. What happens with privatization when you break up your most treasured beliefs and don't bring it into public? You know what happens? You end up with the loss of meaning, the breakdown of meaning. Do you know in Belgium there's such a high rate of suicides now that they are changing the term. They are calling it opting out of life. Opting out of life. They don't want to call it suicide anymore. It is fascinating when you read the story of Oscar Wilde. And I will close with this in a quotation. I wrote a book on great conversations, imaginary conversation between Jesus and others. I did one with Jesus and Buddha, the lotus and the cross. One with Jesus and Krishna, new birth or rebirth. One with Jesus and Hitler, the Lamb and the Führer. One of them was called Jesus Talks to Oscar Wilde, Sense and Sensuality. Oscar Wilde lived a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant. When you read his book, The Picture of Dorian Gray, I think one of the greatest stories ever written. Brilliantly done. In his 40s, he's lying on his deathbed in Paris. The irony of Wilde's life, these two thoughts. If you go to his grave in Paris, it's a giant phoenix a huge, huge stone, a phoenix. He chose his own epitaph from the book of Job. My friends saw my suffering and was silent. A hedonist goes to a book on suffering to describe his life. And the irony was, lying in his deathbed, he looks at his lover, Robbie Ross, and he asks him an incredible question. He said, Robbie, did you ever love any one of those young boys for their own sake? Robbie Ross says, no. He said, neither did I. The using of a person for self-fulfillment was haunting him even as he was dying. And he called for a priest. You see, pleasure is a greater problem than pain when pleasure has been unlimited and emptiness still comes in. G.K. Chesterton said, meaninglessness does not come from being weary of pain. Meaninglessness comes from being weary of pleasure. And so I say to you, secularization will lead to the loss of shame, pluralization to the loss of meaning, and privatization to pluralization to the loss of reason, and privatization to the loss of meaning. No shame, no reason, no meaning. That's the control of secularism. I close with this. Daniel Yankelevich started defining culture as a search for a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in the passage of our lives. And then he says this, the rules in America are changing. The rules in America are changing. And we are witnessing the death of values and the death of a culture. He wrote that 30 years ago. He ends his article after doing a survey with a large number of young men and women, asking them some questions. And he ends with these words. After talking to a couple by the name of Abby and Mark in an open and a free relationship, here's what he says. If you feel it is imperative to fill all your needs, and if these needs are contradictory or in conflict with those of others or simply unfillable, then frustration will inevitably follow. To Abby and to Mark as well, self-fulfillment means, listen to this now, to Abby and to Mark, self-fulfillment means having a career and marriage and children and sexual freedom and autonomy and being liberal and having money and choosing nonconformity, and insisting on social justice, and enjoying city life, and country living, and simplicity, and graciousness, and reading, and good friends, and on and on. But the individual is not truly fulfilled by becoming even more autonomous. Indeed, to move far in this direction is to risk psychosis, the ultimate form of autonomy. The injunction that to find oneself, one must lose oneself contains a truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. The injunction that to find oneself, one must lose oneself contains a truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. Jesus Christ said, if anyone will come unto me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. The Apostle Paul made the comment, I die daily. There has to be a death to self, that the purpose and the meaning that God has made you for can ultimately live and triumph in a secularized, pluralized, privatized existence where shame goes, reason goes, and meaning goes. It tells you just to indulge and indulge and indulge. And Abby and Mark found out they had it all, and yet inside had nothing. So I'll leave those for thoughts with you, and we have a time to interact with your questions. Thank you so much for patiently giving me a hearing.
As Dr. Zacharias said, we'll now open it up for questions. There are 2 microphones here in the middle. Please feel free to line up. Please keep your question simple and to 1 question so that we can get through as many as possible. Do you have all 4 microphones on? Yep. Okay. We can start off with a question from SMS. Do you believe that there is only one way of truth to God? Why do we not just ask God to guide us to the truth, since he is, quote unquote, God with infinite power? I am sure that God will guide me to the truth one day in my life, when I feel it with logic.
Say the last line again.
I am sure that God will guide me to the truth one day in my life when I feel it with logic.
Great question. Really good question. Truth, by definition, is exclusive. The moment you make an affirmation or an assertion about life's essence and meaning, you are implicitly saying that something that's contradictory to that is either false or your way is just one way of thinking and it is not the truth. When you go into a court of law, you are always asked questions with the attorney on the other side of the issue looking for 2 things: correspondence and coherence. Correspondence of truth applies to particular assertions and statements. Were you at that place on the day of the murder? No, I wasn't. They will make sure you are telling the truth. But that one answer doesn't mean you had nothing to do with the murder. It only says you were not there at the time of the murder. So the second thing the lawyer will try to do and test you is not just correspondence, but coherence. Are all of your answers fitting together in a coherent response? So truth generally in components looks for correspondence and coherence. What are you looking for? Number 1, the truth. Number 2, you test it with correspondence and coherence. How do you test correspondence and coherence in a worldview? That takes you to 3. Logical consistency, empirical adequacy, or experiential relevance. When I study Christianity or Hinduism or Islam or whatever, I'm looking for these 3 tests: logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance when you're studying any worldview. What are the questions you have to ask of that worldview? There are 4. Questions on origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And you bring 5 disciplines to bear upon it. I won't go into all of those. 1 is truth, correspondence, coherence, logical consistency, empirical adequacy, experiential relevance, answers to origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Now here it is. You take the major worldviews, pantheism or the monotheistic faith, putting one against the other, you will find that they are not all saying the same thing. They are making assertions that mutually exclude what the other worldview claims. So the fact of the matter is, truth, by definition, is exclusive. And as you've raised the question, you have given part of the answer yourself, that you would look for it to be logically persuasive in what you believe. You don't want an illogical or an irrational faith to hold on to. And I say to you, when I put these tests to the Judeo-Christian faith in the person of Jesus Christ, I'll answer that tomorrow, why I am a Christian, Michael, and I will answer it. I find it is the only worldview that meets all of these tests. The fact of the matter is, logically, they can all be wrong, but logically, they cannot all be right, unless you're living in a madhouse. So here's what I would say to you, sir or ma'am, who wrote this question. Open the Bible, take the Gospel of John, and start reading it. And as you read the Gospel of John, in your heart and mind, you ask God to reveal himself to you, and you ask yourself the questions. I came to know Christ on a bed of suicide in Delhi when I was 17 years old. My ancestors came from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood. We'd long abandoned that, but they came from the deep south in Kerala. They were called the Nambudhiris. I had no meaning in life as a young student, and I attempted to poison myself and end my life. A man walked in with a Bible. I don't know if I'd ever opened a Bible on my own. Maybe a little bit smattering here and there. I don't know. But I suddenly didn't own one. And he brings me this Bible, and he turns to the Gospel of John, chapter 14. Who's Jesus talking to? Thomas. What did Thomas say after the resurrection? He said, I'm not going to believe it until I see him. Once he did, he said, Ho kurios mu, ho theos mu, my Lord and my God. Thomas went to India to preach to whom? The Nambudhiris in the deep south of Kerala, and paid with his life. He went to a land of 330 million deities to give them the message of Christ. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me. The truth that Christ claimed, he justified, demonstrated. And when I prayed that prayer at the age of 17, that was 50 years ago, and I say to you, the transformation in my heart not only started immediately, it has grown and grown and grown, and the ultimate meaning that he alone can give to you by putting life back together. Grace and forgiveness and redemption are his. The conversion of the Apostle Paul from Saul to Paul, the confirmation to Thomas and James, the brother of Jesus. These three were going to ultimately change history because they had seen the resurrected Christ. We're a few days away from Easter. And the resurrection of Jesus set Konrad Adenauer to Billy Graham. He said, Mr. Graham, outside of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, I know of no other hope for mankind. And so I say to you, take the truth claimed in the scriptures, put it to the test of truth and the coherence in the 4 questions. I will be praying for you as you've asked this question, and I pray one day you will find the logic of it, of whom God said, in the beginning was the Word, Logos. And the Word was God, Theos. And the Word became flesh, Sarkos. The logic of the incarnation and the logic of Jesus' answers will transform your life when you truly put your questions to him and see the coherence of the answers. I hope that helps a little bit. Michael, every religion.
Did you get the question?
So I think your question was, in every religion there's a golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if we did that, would there be peace? If my reading of the other world religions is correct, the statement in other religions globally is normally put in the negative. Do not do anything to anyone else that you don't want to have done to you. So it normally comes in the negative. Now what is unique in the Christian faith is Christ's positive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yes.
So, is this not working? Do we need to be...
I can hear you.
Here, Michael.
Sorry, so let me just repeat that again. Your question was, in case everyone didn't hear it, there's a golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's found in every world religion. If we did this, would there be peace?
Yeah.
The point I was making was, if you read other world religions, you'll actually find, you don't find that phrase. The phrase you find is, do not do anything to anyone that you don't want to have done to yourself. It's always put as a negative. It's a prohibition. Don't do this to that person if you wouldn't want them to do it back to you. In other words, it's a policy of non-interference in other people's lives. What Christ advocated was something slightly different, which is what you quoted, because your quotation comes from the Bible. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In other words, not refrain from doing anything to anyone else if you wouldn't want it done back to you, but rather a positive act in this particular way. I'm sure that if a lot of people embraced it, that there would be, the world would look in a very different way. But then I'm bound to say that because as a Christian, I think if we embrace Christ, we will actually see a changing of the heart. I think the big problem comes, and I think the challenge for all of us comes in the fact that we struggle, if we're honest, to act in that way. It's not the fact we need so much to be reminded that we should do to others what we would have like done to ourselves. The simple truth is that we wrestle to live that way if we're honest. There was a huge survey done, a survey done by a while ago, and they asked people to imagine peace. And after they asked people to imagine peace in their mind, they asked them to describe it. Some people thought of mountains filled with snow, other people of beautiful lakes, other people of fields filled with flowers. Interestingly, one thing united all of these pictures together. There were no people in them. Now, isn't that interesting? We are asked to imagine peace, and the first thing we do is eliminate everyone else.
Oh la la, that's bad. Okay.
In that sense, it makes it easy then not to do anything that you wouldn't want them done to you. There's no one there to do anything to you because there's nobody there.
Nobody else.
Ask anyone with leadership responsibility who's a manager. If they could eliminate their people problems, they've eliminated almost all of their problems. So, I think the challenge isn't just so much how do we do this, how do we act this way, but what will change our heart so it is our desire to do unto others as they would have done unto us. And I think we are all looking for that which would change our heart, that we may actually live that way. And that's the life-changing transformation that Dr. Ravi Zacharias, I think, was talking about just moments earlier.
May
It's a great
may I quote a famous man? I was tempted to quote Mahatma Gandhi. No violent people.
I was just going to say, it's a great question, but I think one thing you should always remember at the back of it, that all religions at their core are fundamentally different. They may be superficially similar. They're not fundamentally the same and superficially different. They are fundamentally different and superficially may have similarity. And once you get into that fundamental difference, it redefines what it means to be human and why the imperative must follow. And by the way, it is not always stated in the same way. I think it's important to know that there are some worldviews which would actually take issue with that. Some worldviews might say that we will have perfectly peace if I can eliminate you from the scene. You know, that's why Jean-Paul Sartre said, hell is other people. He said, I'm okay until I bump into somebody else, if I could get rid of that person. And so there are some major religions in the world for whom elimination of a different person is the guarantor for peace. So the fundamental issues are far greater in all of these. A superficial statement of an imperative doesn't unite the fundamentally different worldviews. Just take humanism. If you take the humanistic ethic of Peter Singer from Princeton, you'd be aghast at what it is he thinks that we may have a right to do as humanists. So I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to take any more time. Any other question?
Go ahead.
So I just wanted to ask, can you logically show that a set of predetermined moral rules is going to be better in the long run than one simple minimal damage moral principle? For instance, I myself always get impressed by how much damage is done in the name of moral, in the name of honesty, as it brings so much prejudice to people around us. So I just wonder if you can
understand the question. I did follow it. Can somebody repeat the question here?
Could you go ahead and repeat the first question?
Well, I wonder if you can show logically, as we speak about reasoning and logics here, that a set of predetermined moral principles, let's say like the Ten Commandments or some other example, actually will be superior in the long run than a simple minimal damage principle.
Did you get it?
I'll take it. I haven't followed. Can you repeat that?
Basically, how could something like the Ten Commandments, can you show with logic and reason why that would be superior to a principle of minimal damage? So just don't hurt anyone. Do what you want, just don't hurt anyone. Did I understand the question?
I didn't say that minimal damage means do what you want, just don't hurt anyone. I just say keep the damage minimal, and that can mean with any way you want.
Okay.
I think this is a fascinating question. Can we show that a set of moral principles is somehow superior than this a predetermined set of moral principles is somehow superior than just this basic principle of minimal damage, did you say?
Yes.
I think this goes a bit hand in hand with the prior question, the question about do unto others as you would have done unto you. There's a basic notion in morality of things that we should not do, plus things that we should do. If you notice the Ten Commandments, you'll see some of them are prohibitive and some are prescriptive. There's some things you should not do and some things you should do. And minimal damage does seem to be prohibitive. Don't do certain things, again, as was insinuated here, don't do certain things to hurt other people, or don't do certain things to hurt yourself, or however we might come from this minimal damage perspective, it seems to be addressing the prohibitive side. But as we saw in the question prior, there seems to be a notion that's universal in terms of things we should do. That, for example, love. We should love others. We should be selfless. We should care for one another. These kinds of principles I don't think can ever arise out of a minimal damage mindset. It needs to be one of, beyond minimal damage, it has to be one of self-sacrifice, one of altruism. And that generally can't be explained or defined from a naturalistic perspective, I would say. So what am I trying to get at? What reason would we have to be caring, loving, doing unto others as we would have done unto ourselves if there were no higher or greater good? And I think this is why, going back to the prior question, and I'll let you tack on after I finish, but going back to the prior question of do unto others as you've done unto yourself, I think there's a very specific reason why that works very well in Christianity. You look at the teaching found in Matthew chapter 6, which is related. It says, love your neighbor as yourself. When we have I think in a modern mindset, especially that post-Christian Western mindset, we can generally agree that we should do to our neighbors as we would have done to ourselves. Most people, whether religious or not, that I've seen in the West, agree with that tenet. Do unto others as you've done to yourself. But within the Christian context, it makes a lot of sense. Going back to Matthew chapter 6, what is Jesus telling us to do here? You look at the end of Matthew chapter 5, which goes into Matthew chapter 6, and Jesus says certain things. He says, go ahead and feed your enemy if your enemy is hungry. If your enemy is naked, clothe them. You also see in Jesus' teachings things like, if your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. All's fair and well, but how can we do that for our enemy? Well, for one, Christ, his example, his model in the Bible was that he was willing to die for sinners. According to Christian theology, Christ is God, who's willing to die for his creation, even though they had then pit himself against him after he created them. So Christ is willing to die for those who are rebelling against him. And so when somebody like that says to you, if your enemy is hungry, give them something to eat. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink, it has a lot more meaning because he himself is doing it. He's giving life to those who don't have it. Going further than that, if God exists, if there is a creator, if there is a sustainer, if there is one who can sustain us, when he tells us, as he does in Matthew, that don't worry about your food, I will provide it for you. Don't worry about your clothes, I will provide it for you. You couple that with the teaching, now do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Let's take this rubber and make it meet the road here. I have a friend in Canada who she sees the neighbors, they're all Muslim refugees who are coming from overseas to Canada. And she sees them, they have need for a bed, they have need for clothes, they have need for a driver's license. And so she takes her time and she takes her money and she purchases beds, she purchases clothes, she helps them learn how to drive. She does for them as she would hope someone else would do for her. She loves them as she loves herself. Just as she would buy her own child a bed, she's spending her money to buy a bed for her neighbors. Now, that can only really happen to a great degree if you are comfortable that you will be sustained somehow. If you can pour yourself out self-sacrificially, you can only do that if you have confidence that you'll be sustained somehow. In the case of Christian theism, if you have a God who's willing to sustain you, then you can be self-sacrificial even unto your death. And that doesn't make much sense in any other notion. So coming back to this idea of a predetermined set of morals, I was raised not in a Christian environment. I was not raised Christian at all. I was raised up in a Muslim home. And when people, as I myself, as a Muslim, I would say to others, look, Islam, this predetermined set of morals is superior to Christianity. Christians would respond by saying, no, our predetermined set of morals are better. And it came into kind of like just an arguing match of who can talk louder. That wasn't too helpful because it's very difficult to somehow objectively quantify which set of morals will play out better. It's very difficult to do. And so I had to attach those notions to their epistemic core, to what it was that caused rise to those notions. And so for Christianity, then, I had to investigate evidence. I had to see what was it that gave me reason to listen to Jesus. It was a matter of identification. Why should I listen to your beliefs and your ideas as opposed to that person's beliefs and that person's ideas? And to keep a long story short, I believe that Jesus gave us good reason to believe in his teachings because he rose from the dead. For me, the resurrection is the reason why I believe in Jesus' teachings. And the reason why I believe in the resurrection is because I think it passes rigorous critical criteria of historical investigation. So that's why I can believe in these predetermined set of morals, because I believe in the person who gave them. And it makes most sense coming from that theistic framework, coherence. Sure, yes.
If what you say is true, that believing in God or a greater authority is necessary to love and to do selfless acts, then by this thinking, there cannot exist atheists that do charity. And I know quite a lot of atheists that do wonderful charity. They're helping the world, they're helping going to third world countries, trying to improve them in all possible ways, and that they love with the whole heart and have more empathy.
I agree with you entirely. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to clarify. I'm not saying that atheists cannot be moral. Atheists can be great people. So can people of any stripe and any background. Similarly, those who call themselves Christian could be horrible people. What I'm talking about is the logical outworking and consistency of a certain framework of ideas. So for example, Once again, if I take the Christian mindset and I believe in a God who is sustaining me and is providing me with everything I have, and He tells me, that God tells me, go ahead and give to others as you would want to receive if you were them. If that God who's sustaining me, who could do anything, is telling me to do that, then I have confidence to pour myself out even unto death. Especially if I believe in an afterlife where God is going to take care of me for eternity, that gives me no reason to fear being willing to die for people. And the case I would draw your attention to is that of Ronnie Smith. I lived in Texas very recently for a year. And Texas is like a little country within the United States. It's supposedly a state, but it's like its own country. One of my fellow countrymen in that case was a man named Ronnie Smith. Ronnie Smith was a chemistry professor. He had spent his life learning how to teach, didactics, pedagogy, etc., and he had the gift of chemistry. And what he found out was that in Libya, there was a great need for chemistry teachers. And he thought to himself, I have this gift, they need that gift. If I were in their shoes, I should do as I would want done to me. I should love my Libyan neighbors as myself. I'm going to go teach them. People all around him were saying, Ronnie, do you realize that they're going to see you as an enemy? They might kill you. He said, I don't care, because my life is in Jesus' hands. My afterlife is in Jesus' hands. Even if they do kill me, I don't care. I'm going to go and teach them and to use my gift accordingly. Ronnie Smith went to Libya, and he taught for a short while. And then in December, I believe it was December 7th of this past year, so about 4 months ago, while he was out jogging, he was shot and killed. His wife wrote a letter a week later to those who killed him. And her words were as follows: I want the Libyans to know I still love them. I want the people who killed my husband to know I still love them, because God loves me unconditionally and He tells me to love others unconditionally. Therefore, I love you, and if I had the chance to do it all again, even if it meant the death of my husband, I would say yes and do it all again. That kind of confidence, that kind of love is only born out of a framework where you have a God who's going to take care of you and an afterlife which you can be confident in. On the flip side, if you have an atheist frame of mind, now I'm not saying atheists are all immoral. Once again, I want to qualify this. There's a lot of moral atheists. There are a lot of good, loving, altruistic atheists. But that said, I look at the atheistic framework, and I know this quite well because almost all my professors were atheists, both while I was studying religion and while I was studying medicine at medical school. And I know that the framework within which they teach is that the universe came into existence without any intentional cause. It was natural processes, random chance happened to cause the universe to come into existence. And after that happened, then you had galaxies that formed, and you had the Earth that happens to exist in a place where life can be sustained. On that Earth, somehow, and we're not exactly sure how because we have no functioning model of abiogenesis, but somehow life began. What does that mean for us then? What it means for life, what it means for human life is that every single person here, everyone who's listening to me right now, is for all intents and purposes a cosmic byproduct. Is not actually valuable in any sense other than a utilitarian sense. And so, what would cause me to self-sacrificially take care of another cosmic byproduct? If all I have is this 80 years of life on this earth, why should I use it and deny myself my privileges versus help somebody else? Now, once again, we could still say that atheists love and care for one another, sure, but it doesn't come out of that frame of thinking. It doesn't come out of that notion of reality. So, in sum, I would say that the Christian notion of reality is one that if you're going to follow a God who's self-sacrificial and tells you to love others even to the point of your death, that breeds more altruism, that breeds more generosity than does a worldview which says you're a cosmic accident, so is everyone else. That's my perspective. Thanks for asking the question.
It's a great question, and I think, as Nabil said, followed on the heels of the other one. Let me add 2 footnotes to that are very important. The first one to underscore what Nabil has said and angle into it from a slightly different perspective, and then give you a closing thought, and we move to the next question. Moses gave 613 laws. David took those 613 and reduced it to 15. Isaiah reduced them to 11. Micah reduced it to 3, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. I would have thought Jesus would reduce it to 1. He didn't. When he was asked which is the greatest commandment, he said this: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these 2 commandments hang all of the laws and the prophets. The one generated the next, because every individual is created in the image of God. So there was a logical sequence, because of God's existence, the essential worth of every human being. But now let me underscore something very critically different. First of all, humanism is not monolithic. If you were to take the atheistic worldview, there are seven different humanistic value theories, ranging all the way from Marx's humanism to Ayn Rand's humanism. And so here's the point I want to make to you. In the Christian worldview, the problem is not morality. Jesus didn't come into this world to make bad people good. He came into this world to make dead people live. We are dead to God, and he came to make us alive to God. All of the religions of the world are ways of earning your way into heaven. All of them. Except in the Christian worldview, you cannot earn it. The problem is given to what morality itself cannot solve. I cannot earn my way to heaven. It is a gift of God's grace and God's forgiveness. So it stands unique and stands differently. So humanism by itself, different humanistic theories. All of the other religions are works-oriented religions. It's not so in the Christian faith. It is the grace of God and the forgiveness of God. So our goal is not ultimately to be more moral people. That is a result of what we have come to know as Christians, that I was dead to God and I'm alive to him. So the predicament is different, and therefore the solution is different as well. I'll leave that with you.
I have a question to Nabil Qureshi, and it's about me having a lot of friends that are Muslim and believing in the truth of the Muslim faith. And I want you to say which way do you think it's best to share the gospel with an honest believing Muslim?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, sir. I think it's very, very important to note exactly how you phrased the question, and that was, how do we share our faith with our Muslim friends? I'm sensing in the West a growing trend of fear, of xenophobia, if you will, of Muslims, that we should be afraid of them, that we should protect ourselves against them. I think first and foremost of my mother. When someone says the word Muslim, I think of my mother first, because every Ramadan she recites the Quran twice. She reads 2 separa of the Quran every single day. She taught me to pray 5 times a day, not including nafil prayers and sunnah prayers. She taught me to recite the Quran from the age of 4 to by the age of 5. I had recited the entire Quran in Arabic. So when I think Muslim, I see her as kind of my archetypal Muslim, of course, Muhammad aside. And she is one of the most loving, kind, generous, hospitable people you'll ever meet. And so for someone to ask me the question, well, what should we do with the Muslims? That to me immediately says, whoa, you have the wrong attitude. Your attitude was a right one. How should we love them? How should we share with them? So I would say the answer is the same as the preamble. The first thing we have to do is befriend. We have to get to know people. A true friendship, not a superficial one, not one with the aim of converting, but a true friendship. I think as a Christian, we are called to love as God loves us. Actually, that's actually what the Bible says. Don't just love those who love you. Even pagans do that. Love those who do not love you. And so we have to make sure our love is unconditional and it extends to all people. And especially as Muslims, the numbers of Muslims coming from the Middle East and immigrating to other parts of the world is increasing. I was asked a question very recently about that by a newspaper in the US. And they said, how should we respond to all these mosques being built? And should we try to stop the mosques from being built? Or how should we? It's like, I said, no, that's where we should go and meet Muslims and befriend them so that we can build dialogue. Because the fact of the matter is, when I was a Muslim, I didn't understand Christians. None of them were talking to me. None of them were really sharing life with me. Every now and then when someone would talk, they would just try to share the gospel with me, but I thought, what do you care about me? What do you care about my way of life? All you want to do is convert me, so why should I listen to you? And the first time someone actually befriended me, a Christian actually befriended me, we started understanding one another. Well, he actually had Muslim friends before. He was my first real Christian friend. And to me, I thought, for example, that the idea of the Trinity was absolute blasphemy. The Quran says in chapter 5, verse 73, stop saying three. Stop saying Trinity. Desist. It would be better for you. Chapter 5, verse 72, the verse before said, if you believe that Jesus is Allah, then you are going to hell. Your place is the abode of fire. And so, to me, the idea of Trinity was absolute blasphemy. And whenever I'd speak to a Christian and ask them, can you explain the Trinity to me? They were simply unable. They weren't able to tease out the difference between three beings and one being and three persons. And they weren't able to tease that out. And so, with my friend who shared the gospel with me, what he did first and foremost was befriend me. I would say 90% of the time we spent together was studying genetics or biology. I was pre-medicine, he was a biology major, and so we just enjoyed life together. And then the last 10% was doors were opened up to share the gospel on his behalf, and for me it was a door to da'wah. I was trying to convert him to Islam. And so I wasn't successful. I don't know if you noticed. So how do we share the gospel? And I cannot overemphasize the importance of befriending and getting to know them, because some Muslims don't have any problems with Christian theology. They have problems with the Israel-Palestine conflict, or they have problems with the way the Crusades happened. That's kind of their issue. Other Muslims, like I had an issue with the theology. How could Jesus be God? That's blasphemy. Jesus didn't die on the cross. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ from Surah An-Nisa. It says very clearly, Jesus did not die on the cross, nor was he crucified. So befriend them. See what it is that their issues are. My firm belief as a Christian is that everyone needs the gospel in some sense or another. And so befriend them and find out in what way can the gospel address their life. I was at Louisville, Kentucky a few weeks ago, and I had a student who came up to me and asked me this very question. He didn't have a father in his life. And so getting to know him and his story was kind of my goal. And then when I realized he didn't have a father in his life, for me it was all of a sudden, okay, this is the thing I'm going to focus on, what it means for God to be your father and what it means to have a good father. So there's no magic bullet here. There's no one thing to do to share with people, except I think that common core of befriending and then understanding and speaking into their heart and their concerns. And always be ready to give a defense for the faith that you have, being ready to provide reasons for those who ask you. So if you have Muslim friends, I guarantee you at some point or another, if they see you living a devout Christian life, they're going to start asking you, how could you believe this stuff? Or why do you believe in the Bible? Don't you understand it's been changed over time? Or how could you believe in Jesus as God? Don't you see he worshiped God? They're going to have these questions, as 1 Peter 3:15 intimates. So be ready to provide those answers and be humble enough to say, if you don't know the answer, say, look, I don't know, but I will find out, because if it's important to you, it's important to me. So I'll find out and we'll discuss this. So come at it with an attitude of love and humility, and I think the rest will unfold as your relationship progresses.
A question from text. How can you show that there are moral absolutes? Isn't all that we can muster subjective ideas about morality?
That's a very, very good question. There have been various attempts to try, and this is now where we come back to this very important question about who says something. I have two younger brothers. One of them lives here in Stockholm, is married to a Swedish girl and has fallen in love with Swedish paternity provision since he had 3 children under the age of 2 and thinks this is the best country in the world. My other brother, some people feel, is working for an evil enterprise called Goldman Sachs. And, but when he was much younger, he was working as an accountant, and he went to audit the books of a very large firm. And as he finished, he said to the CEO of the company, "Can I do anything else for you?" And the CEO said, "I'm not falling for that trick again." And my brother said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Last year, an accountant from your company," it was called Arthur Anderson at the time, came and did our audit. And at the end, he sat where you're sitting and said to me, "Is there anything else we can do?" I asked a simple personal taxation question and was sent a bill for £5,000. He said, "I'm not falling for that trick." And my brother said, "Look, if it's really that simple, I'm sure it won't be a problem." He asked a very simple question. My brother rang up his office. He said, "What's the answer to this question?" They gave it to him, and then they said, "And what is the job number?" My brother went quiet because every client has a number, and when someone asks for the number, it's to bill it. So he said, "Why do you want the job number?" He says, "Every call gets logged in the computer, every inquiry is categorized, and every inquiry gets charged." My brother said, "Well, what will be the charge?" And the guy said, "Minimum charge, £5,000. And my brother went very quiet. And then he said over the phone, "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know who you're talking to?" And now the voice on the other end went quiet. And he went, "No, sir, I have no idea." And my brother said, "Well, neither do I," and he hung up the phone. Now, the question comes about authority. So the simplest logical place to start with any moral command would be this: when anyone is offering it to you, who says so? That has to be one of your first questions. And the human mind, no matter how brilliant we think we are, is capable of sometimes making very profound mistakes. Someone once described logic as going wrong with confidence, and although that isn't necessarily the case, it's certainly, we have the capacity for it. So the question comes down to, on whose authority? And this is why within the Christian faith, all of these questions eventually get pushed back into one foundational question. Who is the person of Jesus Christ? If he is God incarnate, what he has to say about morality is going to be right even if we think he's wrong. I mean, would you want to mark God's maths test? I mean, if you did a maths test and God did a maths test and you disagreed about the final answer, who's more likely to have got it right? So, if Christ is the person of God, his pronouncement and insight on this area is going to far outweigh anything that any of us could say. I think this is why in the book of Proverbs it says, there is a way that seems right to a person, but its path leads to death. There are times when we persuade ourselves completely that it is the moral right thing to do and it's what we should do, but it's actually the wrong path, and we discover too late. If Jesus is who he claims to be, then we have an authoritative voice on this question. If Jesus Christ is not who he claims to be, if he is not God incarnate, if he's just another human voice, then by all means let us see what insight he may have had, critique him with the benefit of hindsight, and sift through what we think is good and reject that which we think he got wrong. But if he is who he claims to be, then we can trust what he has to say with a huge amount more certainty. Now, once you've moved outside of that, I think it may be possible, through some rational means, to try to persuade people on the basis of what we call contingency, that there may be such a thing as human rights, and maybe we can formulate some idea of what those could look like. But it's very difficult. And I can remember speaking at the London School for Economics a couple of years ago, and having a delegation come to me because they were hosting the Student United Nations debates, and a group of students from China and another group from India came and said, we completely reject the Judeo-Christian ethic, which is the foundation for all Western human rights. And we have spent the whole time here this week being told how we should treat people, labor laws and human rights laws, and we believe none of it. Can you persuade us, if we do not believe there's anything special about being human, that we are not created in God's image, that there is no sacredness to life, why we should listen to anyone lecture us on human rights? And I looked to another group of Western students who were there, and I said, what do you make of this? And they said, well, we've been losing every debate for the last week. And I remember looking back at this other group of students, and I said, no, I think you're correct in your analysis. This is why the professor of the history of European thought at the London School for Economics, who has written many, many books, wrote a book entitled Straw Dogs, in which, as the professor of European thought at the London School for Economics said, it is time for us atheists to finally reject humanism. Humanism is Christianity dressed up in liberal, secular terms. Humanists repeat the same error that Christians make. Christians believe there is something special about being human, and as a result of that, argue for human rights. But we have rejected God. We are not created in God's image. There is no God in whose image we can be created. And now we need to reject all forms of human rights, because in the end it's all about power. The strong will always dominate the weak, and the West is being held back by an ethic where it is not using its military force to dominate the nations around it. And if we don't dominate them, they will come and dominate us. Let us finally develop a political and economic theory that's consistent with our atheistic Darwinian conviction, where only the fittest survive, because if we don't get them, they'll come after us. And this is now from a professor who has written books that have sold tens of millions of copies. So please don't think this professor is some strange guy sitting in the middle of nowhere. He occupied one of the most prestigious university chairs in the world in political thought. And this is the conclusion he's come to. Now, he and I agree about everything apart from one thing. Because he and I are agreed that if there is a God and Christ is him, and we were created in his image, then this argument goes exactly the opposite way. So I think it's a very good question. I think it's a very strong question. I would urge you to start, if you're interested in looking at it from a Christian perspective, from there. The most eloquent book I've read on this issue from an atheistic perspective, and I agree with everything he says, apart from the belief that there is no God, would be Professor John Gray from the London School for Economics in his book Straw Dogs. And if you haven't read it, I'll read that book. I think it's a fascinating book written by a guy who's trying to be intellectually honest with the moral outworkings of his own atheistic conviction. And I think he puts his case very, very eloquently and very, very powerfully and very, very brilliantly.
I think we'll bring this to a close with a closing statement here. Now, I think I saw one person standing there. Do you want to accommodate that question? Otherwise, we may get stoned. Are you planning to raise a question from the microphone for Nabil or Michael?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Actually for you, because you were talking about segregation. As I understood, segregation is for me when you have the separation of old and young, rich and poor, foreigners and natives. So as we were talking about logic, how would your suggestion be for a logical solution to work against segregation?
To work against what?
Segregation.
Segregation.
You were pointing out worldviews, so maybe working against segregation of worldviews.
I think I followed it until you added that statement. How would I argue logically against segregation?
Or my question was, how can we work against segregation in a logical way?
Fair enough. Let me make sure, again, if I don't answer it, make sure you let me know. When you talk about segregation, are you talking about racial, cultural, and all of those things? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, this
Okay.
is how I understand it from the media.
Have I got it right? Okay. You see this gray hair? It goes down to here. And there's less gray transmitting. I actually have an amplification system that in open forums helps me to hear it, but I didn't bring it today. So it allows me to ignore questions more easily. All right. It's a great question, and I think it's a question of great importance. I was born in India, raised in India. Even though I was raised in the north, I was born in the south. In terms of complexion, the southerner has a different complexion to the northerner. In terms of language, they have a different language, north and south. Even in the north, there are many different languages. In terms of the way they eat, the manner in which they hold the food in their hands, you can watch a northerner and a southerner and know which part they come from. There are real differences. The tragedy of racism and looking at superiority and inferiority in one way or the other is a very painful thing in life. And there are tensions within countries as there are tensions interracially as well. It's not just internationally. The whole caste system is a pretty fascinating. That's why, by the way, one of the reasons Gautama Buddha left Hinduism and started his own Buddhist way of thinking was because of the caste system. It was a segregated way right from the beginning. Now, most of my Indian friends with whom I live, you never hear it brought up, you never mention it. My friends, we had no issue with it, but theoretically, it was actually there. What I think it is critical for us to address this whole issue of segregation, the Christian worldview is a unique answer here, and I'll tell you why. When you look at the way differences are there, Friedrich Nietzsche made the comment, equality. Do you have my book there, Matt? I think I want to quote this for you because I think it is fascinating what Nietzsche as an atheist said here. Let me see if I can find that. I don't know if I will. It's somewhere here that he made the comment. Here it is. I want you to listen to this carefully because Hitler's extension of Nietzschean thought is precisely what you've really raised right here. Says Nietzsche, the atheist, equality is a lie. Equality is a lie concocted by inferior people who arrange themselves in herds to overpower those who are naturally superior to them. The morality of equal rights is a herd morality because it opposes the cultivation of superior individuals. It leads to the corruption of the human species. Equality is a lie concocted by inferior people. This was Nietzschean thought, something that Hitler had in his own mind, the Übermensch, the Superman. If you go into certain worldviews who will talk to you about reincarnation, why will they boast about it? Every birth is a rebirth for which you're paying for the previous birth. This is the way it actually goes. Jesus had a man come to him, and the man said to him, "Is it all right to pay taxes to Caesar?" Now, I have to tell you this, the day before I began this trip, I had to pay my taxes to Caesar because April 15th will come before I get home, and I resented having to go and pay what Caesar asked me to pay. So I wish Jesus had said no. It would have been a wonderful freedom from Caesar, okay? But Jesus looked at the man and said to him, do you have a coin? And the man said, yes. He said, give it to me. Jesus took the coin and Jesus said to him, whose image do you see on this? He said, Caesar's. He said, give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and give to God that which is God's. The man should have had another question. What belongs to God? Jesus would have said, whose image is on you? You belong to God. When Jacob and Esau met after years of being hostile towards each other, one said to the other, I see in your face the face of God. Jesus pays you the greatest compliment, and me the greatest compliment, in saying we are created in the image of God. I'm grateful to God for my ethnicity. I'm glad I was born where I was born. My Indian heritage is very precious to me, and never wanted to be anybody else. Others may wish I was somebody else, but I'm glad I am who I am. When I look at a fellow human being, I see him or her as created imago Dei, image of God. So I will never violate their intrinsic worth. The Christian worldview is against the segregated process because it creates a hierarchy of that which God has called equality. You have human rights because humanity has essential worth. That essential worth is given to you by God. And so when you go to the Ten Commandments, what does it say? Life is sacred, your marriage is sacred, your property is sacred, your time is sacred, your possessions are sacred, and so are mine. I do not have the right to violate it. So with that imperative, racism or cultural superiority or all of that is anathema in the mind, in the eyes of God. And that's why I said to somebody today at lunch, Mahatma Gandhi said about Christianity, I like their Christ, I don't like their Christian. Because Christendom in history has not always lived with the convictions of what our Savior gave to us. I'll close with this illustration, two of them actually. A woman at the well that Jesus spoke to, a woman with 5 broken marriages. And the disciples are saying to him, what on earth are you doing talking to this Samaritan woman? She was a Samaritan, she was a woman, 5 shattered marriages. Jesus sits by the well and waits for her to come, talks to her, and made her the first evangelist to the Samaritan people. A woman with the alabaster ointment, who probably got it through her trade and through her private life, comes into the room and washes his feet with the alabaster ointment and with her tears. And the Pharisees who lived by the law make the comment, if he only knew who she was, he would never have allowed her to do this to him. And he looked at him, the Pharisee, who never spoke a word, and he says this, if a man were forgiven 500 and a man were forgiven 50, who do you think would love the creditor more? He says, well, the one who owed more. He said, you're looking at her. You're looking at her. I walked into the museum today to see the Silver Bible going back to 400, 500 AD. I was in Albania, where they have one written in the 400s by Chrysostom in gold ink. And when they brought it for me to see, with guards holding it, it opened to the passage of the woman with the alabaster ointment. And in Greek, what Jesus says is this, wherever the gospel is preached, there shall also this be told of what this woman has done to me. He elevated the despised in a community and gave them the equality of his gospel story of what he did to this individual life. God alone knows how to exalt you without flattering you and to humble you without humiliating you. And he does that for all of us as human beings. We are created in the image of God. So I just close with this. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the courtesy of listening to us. Thank you for the grace with which you have given us a hearing. We know many of you may not agree with everything we've said, but you have to please give this one thought. Where we go personally and in civilization, Will Durant said, the greatest question of our time is not going to be east or west, north or south, communism versus capitalism. The greatest question of our time is going to be, can man live without God? I wrote a book based on that statement. So ask yourself the question, is it not important to find out who God is, if he exists, and what is it he has said to us in sending his Son to be the Savior of the world? Turn to the Gospel of John, ask him to speak to you, and tomorrow night we will give you a talk on why we follow Christ, the defense of the Christian faith. Good night, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Zacharias. Thank you, Michael and Nabil. Thank you all for coming. Tomorrow evening, Dr. Zacharias will talk about why I am a Christian. Tonight, under your seat, there is a response card. We would love for you to fill it out. It will only take a second. There are only a couple of questions on there. We'd love to know what you think. Also, as you leave, you can put that in some boxes that are on your way out through the center aisle here. Thank you so much. Tomorrow evening will also be live streamed as well. For those of you who are watching at home, please check it out on YouTube. We'll see you tomorrow.
If we can help you fill it out, we'll be happy to do it.